In the shrouded dawn of April 2025, St. Peter's Square lay cloaked in mist, its ancient cobblestones glistening under the weight of a grieving world. The air was heavy with the tolling of bells and the scent of incense, as thousands gathered to mourn Pope Francis, their faces etched with sorrow, their candles flickering like stars against the gray. Among the vibrant blue and yellow uniforms of the Swiss Guard, Matteo Moretti stood rigid, his halberd a silent sentinel, his eyes burning with a secret that could shatter centuries of tradition. For those of you who've lived through the trials of war, the quiet devotion of faith, or the steadfast love of family through decades of change, the Swiss Guard are a symbol of unwavering duty. Their silence a vow as enduring as the values you've held dear. Perhaps the pride of a uniform worn in service, or the honor of a promise kept through hardship. But on this day, Matteo, a 30-year-old guard with a modern soul, would defy 500 years of protocol by placing a small silver cross on the Pope's casket, an act that would shake the Vatican, inspire millions, and reveal a sacred vow of love that echoed far beyond Rome. Why did he risk everything? Subscribe now to uncover the truth behind his defiance, and join us in exploring stories of courage that changed the world. Matteo Moretti was a man of quiet intensity, his broad frame filling the Renaissance-era uniform, its stripes a vivid testament to his 8 years of service. Raised in Lugano, Switzerland, on the shores of a lake that mirrored the Alps, he grew up on the tales of his grandfather, Antonio, a former Swiss guard who had served under Pius XII during the war-torn 1940s. By the lake's edge, Antonio would recount stories of standing vigil in the Vatican's shadowed halls, his old ceremonial helmet gleaming as he spoke of duty and sacrifice. "Serve with heart," he urged Matteo, his voice rough with age, his eyes bright with memory, as he handed the boy the helmet, its weight a promise of legacy. To you, who may recall the pride of a family tradition, perhaps a grandparent's war stories shared over tea, a mother's recipes passed down, or a father's tools still kept in the garage, Matteo's upbringing might resonate, a testament to the power of heritage to shape a life. At 18, Matteo joined the Swiss Guard, driven by a need to honor his grandfather's legacy, his drills in the Vatican courtyard, a dance of precision under the glaring sun, his vow to protect the Pope a fire in his heart. But a bond with Francis, forged in quiet moments, would redefine his mission days before his death. Pope Francis summoned Matteo to his chambers, a rare and unlogged meeting arranged by Monsignor Ventresca, the Pope's trusted secretary. The room was dim, lit by a single candle, the air thick with the scent of incense and the weight of finality. Francis, frail in his white cassock, sat at a small table, his face pale but his eyes alive with purpose. "Protect my legacy of love," he whispered, his voice a fragile thread, his hand trembling as he handed Matteo a small silver cross, its surface etched with the words, "Amor vincit." Love conquers. Matteo's face registered shock, his breath catching as he took the cross, its weight heavier than its size, its meaning a mystery wrapped in trust. "Place this when I'm gone," Francis said, his gaze unwavering, his words a sacred charge that stirred both reverence and fear. Matteo tucked the cross into his uniform, his throat tight, his heart racing with the magnitude of the request. "For you, who've been entrusted with a dying wish." Perhaps a family secret shared in hushed tones, a promise made at a bedside, or a duty that tested your courage. This moment might echo a time when trust came with a burden, when love demanded defiance. The funeral in St. Peter's Square was a tableau of grief, the mist curling around the basilica's dome like a shroud, the crowd's murmurs, a soft hymn against the bell's toll. Cardinals in scarlet robes stood solemn. Dignitaries from across the globe bowed their heads, and pilgrims clutched rosaries, their tears mingling with the morning dew. Matteo stood among the Swiss Guard, his halberd steady, the silver cross, a burning presence in his pocket. Its inscription a silent command that pulsed with Francis's voice. His friend Luca, a fellow guard with a stern face and a loyalty to tradition, leaned close, his voice a low warning. "Don't do anything stupid, Matteo," he said, his glance sharp, his jaw tight with concern. As the Pope's casket passed, borne by pallbearers in black, its polished wood gleaming under the square's floodlights, Francis' words echoed in Matteo's mind. "Protect my legacy." The crowd held its breath, the moment sacred, the silence absolute. But Matteo's heart raced. Torn between the rigid protocol that bound him, stand still, speak not, serve in silence, and the vow he had made to a dying pope, a call to act for love over tradition. Matteo thought of his grandfather, Antonio, whose stories had taught him that duty was not just in standing still, but in standing for something greater. He thought of Francis, whose life had been a testament to love's power, washing the feet of refugees, embracing the sick, choosing a simple room over a palace suite. The casket drew closer, its golden cross catching the light, and Matteo felt the eyes of the crowd. The weight of 500 years of guard tradition, the judgment of his comrades. Cardinal Rossi, a stern figure in the front row, watched with narrowed eyes, his presence a reminder of the Vatican's unyielding hierarchy. Luca's warning echoed, but Francis's voice was louder, a melody of compassion that drowned out doubt. Matteo's resolve hardened, his fear giving way to a clarity that felt like grace, a certainty that this was the moment he was chosen for. His gloved hand brushed the cross in his pocket, its cool metal grounding him, its inscription a beacon guiding his path. Then he moved. His boot struck the marble with a sound that echoed like thunder, a single step that shattered the silence of the square. Gasps rippled through the crowd, mourners gaping, their smartphones raised to capture the unthinkable. A Swiss guard breaking rank at the Pope's funeral. Matteo strode forward, his movements deliberate, his halberd steady in one hand, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and purpose. The world seemed to slow, the bell's toll fading, the crowd's murmurs a distant hum. He reached the casket, his breath shallow, and pulled the silver cross from his pocket, its shine a stark contrast to the dark wood. With trembling fingers, he placed it gently on the casket, its inscription, Amor Vincit, glowing in the mist, a silent testament to a vow kept, a legacy honored. Matteo stepped back, his chest heaving, fear and resolve warring in his eyes. As he returned to his post, his halberd once more at his side, the crowd erupted in murmurs, some outraged, others awestruck, their phones flashing like sparks in the dawn. Cardinal Rossi's glare burned. Luca turned away, his jaw clenched with betrayal. But a few pilgrims nodded, their tears a quiet approval, their hands clasped in prayer. That night, Matteo faced the Vatican Council in an austere chamber, its walls lined with portraits of popes whose stern gazes seemed to weigh his soul. Cardinal Rossi, his scarlet robes stark against the stone, stood at the head of the table, his voice a thunderclap. "You've betrayed the guard," he roared, his finger pointing like a spear. "You broke protocol in front of the world, defiled a sacred moment. Explain yourself." Officers in crisp uniforms flanked him, their faces unreadable. And Cardinal Sofia Bellini, a quieter presence with a reputation for wisdom, watched with thoughtful eyes. Matteo stood firm, his uniform pristine despite the weight of the moment, the silver cross now on the table before them, its inscription glinting in the candlelight. "Francis asked me to honor love," he said, his voice steady, his eyes meeting Rossi's without flinching. "He gave me this cross, entrusted me with his legacy. I acted for him, not against the guard." The room fell silent, the officers exchanging glances, Rossi's anger wavering as Bellini leaned forward, her voice soft but resonant. "Perhaps this was his will," she said, her fingers brushing the cross. "Francis lived for love, not rules. We must consider what he intended. Outside the Vatican, the world was already reacting. The moment captured on countless smartphones, igniting a firestorm on X. Posts flooded the platform, some calling Matteo a hero, others branding him a traitor. He stood for France's heart. Vatican Cross, one user wrote, while another countered, disrespectful to tradition. Hashtags trended Vatican Cross, Swiss Guard, Defiance, spreading the story from Rome to London, from small UK parishes to global newsrooms. Matteo, unaware of the digital storm, stood in the chamber, his thoughts on Francis, on the man who had seen his heart when he was just a guard, a boy from Lugano carrying his grandfather's helmet. He thought of Antonio, whose pride would have swelled at this moment, even if it meant disgrace. The council debated, their voices clashing. Rossi arguing for dismissal, Bellini for mercy, others torn between the guard's honor and the Pope's legacy. The decision was unprecedented. Matteo would be spared dismissal, but reassigned to the Vatican Library, a quieter role away from the square spotlight. Rossi's voice was grudging as he delivered the verdict. You've escaped punishment, but you'll serve in silence. Bellini, however, met Matteo privately, her smile warm as she handed him a rosary, its beads worn from years of prayer. Your cross carried Francis' heart, she said, her voice a balm. He chose you for a reason. Keep his love alive. In the Vatican Library, a grand hall of towering bookshelves and ancient manuscripts, Matteo began his new duty, his black uniform a stark contrast to the blue and yellow he had worn. Father Marco, a witty priest with a limp and a love for stories, greeted him with a grin. You're the cross guy. He said, his eyes twinkling. Stirred up quite the mess. Let's see if you can handle dusty tomes as well as you handle drama. Marco guided Matteo through rows of leather-bound volumes, their pages whispering secrets of the church's past. One day, Matteo found a 1527 journal. Its ink faded, but its story vivid. A god named Lorenzo, who had defied orders to save a relic from a sacked Rome. His act condemned by his peers, but praised by the Pope he served. The parallels struck Matteo like a bell, his fingers tracing the words, his heart lifted by the knowledge that he was part of a quiet lineage. Guards who had acted for love over protocol, for you, who found solace in history. Perhaps a book that spoke to your struggles, a family diary that revealed the ancestors' courage, or a tale told by a grandparent. This journal might recall a moment when the past gave you strength to face the present. Months later, Matteo's story reached a new audience through Emily Hart, a 40-year-old British reporter with a knack for human stories, who interviewed him in the library's quiet corner. Her notepad was open, her eyes attentive as Matteo shared his tale, his voice steady but soft. It was for love, he said, showing her the silver cross, its inscription catching the light. Francis wanted his legacy to live, not in grand gestures, but in small acts of heart. Emily's face softened, her pen pausing as she absorbed the weight of his words, her own heart moved by the God who had risked all. Her article, published in a major UK outlet, went viral. God's cross inspires faith. The headline read, its words spreading across X, Facebook, and newsstands. Posts flooded in. He stood for what's right. Vatican Cross. A London girl tweeted, her words liked thousands of times. This is the church I want. A Manchester priest shared, his post sparking debates in parish halls. Letters poured into the Vatican, their envelopes bearing British stamps, their words a chorus of hope. A vicar from Yorkshire wrote, your act renewed our faith, reminded us to love boldly. A teacher from Sussex shared, my students pray for you, inspired by your courage. Matteo served in silence, his days filled with the rustle of pages and the scent of old leather. The rosary at his wrist, a constant reminder of Bellini's words, of Francis' trust, of a mission that had begun with a cross and would endure in quiet acts. Father Marco became a friend, sharing tales of his own youth in Florence, of a nun who had taught him to see faith in action, not just scripture. "You're like her," Marco said one evening, his grin softening. "You don't just guard your life." Matteo smiled, the rosary warm against his skin. The cross now in a glass case in the library. Its inscription, a guide for his work. He catalogued manuscripts, each one a piece of the church's story. But his thoughts were on Francis's legacy: love over rigidity, compassion over protocol. Luca, once distant, sought Matteo out, his face softened by time. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low. "You honored him. I see it now." The two clasped hands, their bond mended, a testament to the power of understanding, forged in a moment of crisis. The Vatican, bound by tradition, felt the ripple of Matteo's act. The Swiss Guard, once rigid in their silence, began to speak of compassion in their barracks, their training subtly shifting to honor Francis's legacy. A quiet revolution sparked by one guard's defiance. Cardinal Bellini ensured Matteo's story was shared in private Vatican circles, a lesson for the Church's future, her voice a steady advocate for change. The world beyond Rome continued to respond, with UK parishes launching initiatives in Francis's name: soup kitchens, refugee aid, prayer groups, all inspired by the Guard who had placed a cross for love. A letter from a Birmingham grandmother read, "I cared for my son through illness, and your act reminds me why I kept going. Love is worth the risk." A veteran from Leeds wrote, "I served in 45, and your courage is like the men who risked all for their mates." A school in Kent sent a drawing, children's crayons capturing Matteo in his uniform, the cross glowing, Francis's smile a beacon above. In the quiet of the Vatican library, under the soft light of dawn filtering through stained glass windows, Matteo continued his work, his hands steady, his heart full. The rosary gleamed, a reminder of Bellini's faith, of Francis' trust, of a mission that had begun with a small silver cross and would endure in silence. St. Peter's Square, just beyond the library's walls, remained a place of pilgrimage, its guards standing vigil as they had for centuries, their halberds catching the sun, their silence a vow. But Matteo's story, and Francis's, lived on, a spark for those who believe in the power of love, to transcend even the strictest traditions. For you, who've lived through decades of change, through the austerity of post-war Britain, the joy of family milestones, the sorrow of loved ones lost, this tale is a call to remember the moments that define us. Perhaps it's a time you broke a rule for kindness, a meal shared during a strike, a hand extended to a stranger, a tradition set aside for love. Maybe it's a memory from the war, when you stood by a comrade, or a moment at home, when you honored a loved one's memory, despite the cost. Your silence, a testament to their impact. Francis' lesson and Matteo's defiance invite you to share those stories with your children, your grandchildren, your friends at the parish hall, your neighbors over a cup of tea. Write them in a letter. Tell them at a family gathering. Let them live on in the quiet spaces where memories are kept, where love takes root. In a world that often demands conformity, this story reminds us that a single act of heart can echo through time, touching lives we may never know. What would you risk for love? Perhaps it's a moment when you chose compassion over convention, when you acted for someone who needed you, when you honored a heart over a rule. Share it, whether in a whispered conversation, a note slipped into a loved one's hand, or a story told at a community supper, and let it be a spark that lights the way for others. Subscribe to our channel to explore more stories of courage and faith, and join us in celebrating the legacy of love that shines on, a light for us all, through a cross that conquered tradition.